My friends, Ukraine is losing the initiative on the Eastern Front. Whether it's Chasiv Yar outside Avdiivka, or even the new Russian moves along the Luhansk Front. And the latest battlefield reports are extremely uncomfortable for the mainstream media. Here from the BBC, a summit fraught with danger for Ukraine as Russia strengthens. Meanwhile, the New Yorker wrote, Ukraine faces a crucial moment in the war. No shit! I wonder why. Is it because they're going from one defeat after another? Is it because they're getting clapped by soldiers equipped with shovels? Now, as for the Ocheretye breakthrough, pro-Ukrainian reports claim that the Russian offensive has been completely halted and stomped, whereas pro-Russian ones are claiming it's still in full swing. I'll present you with the facts and you'll make up your own mind. So that was the situation on the 10th of April, just before the Russian surprise attack. Then here's the front line on May 1st, 3 weeks after the start. And here's the situation now at the end of the month of May. If anything, in May the Russian army consolidated its gains into a strong salient. We can see that the 47th Mechanized Brigade indeed managed to plug the gaps between Alexandrivka and Novopokrovsk, and thus prevent a complete collapse of the front. But this sacrifice came at a cost. According to Oryx, 81 M2A2 Bradley IFVs have been destroyed, damaged, or captured. We also have video evidence of 8 M1A1 Abrams destroyed out of 31 that were delivered. And we can just imagine the toll on the brigade's manpower. The Financial Times reported US to offer Ukraine security pact as tensions rise between allies. They say, I quote, a second senior Ukrainian official said Zelensky has grown more emotional and nervous over the situation on the battlefield. No, I think he's rather growing nervous at how bad NATO weapons actually are. It's not me saying it, it's his own soldiers.
Його броня на сьогоднішній момент абсолютно недостатня. Вона не захищає екіпаж. У нас був випадок, коли 17 пострілів в хату, а вона стоїть.
Condensation can fry the electrics, they also say.
Oh, but at least British and American instructors are there to turn Ukrainian conscripts into elite Navy SEAL Chads.
This is the top secret base run by British and American ex-soldiers deep within the Ukrainian forests.
Mein Führer, Steiner konnte nicht genügend Kräfte für einen Angriff massieren. Der Angriff Steiner ist nicht erfolgt.
On the 24th of May, Russian troops captured the village of Umanske. Granted, the place only consists of 2 streets. However, this node would allow the Russians to turn the positions of the 47th Mechanized Brigade and push right into the soft belly of the Ukrainian line of defense between Novopokrovsk and Novoselivka, which could lead to a Novo debacle. Jokes aside, 3 days later, on the 27th, it was Netailovy's turn to fall, as you can see with this video of Russian soldiers raising their flag over the village. This farm here could be turned into a solid defensive outpost to deter further Russian attacks, if and only if the Ukrainians managed to hold on to the rest of the village. Not surprisingly, this position was where the Russians concentrated their efforts. Once it fell, it was pretty much GG well played. By late May, in a never-ending grinding battle forward, we witnessed another Russian 1.5 kilometer push towards Sokil, which was followed by a complete withdrawal, evacuation of Ukrainian positions west of Semenivka. This means the Russian forces could be flanking Ukraine's fallback positions. If combined with an attack from Umanske, Ukraine will be facing a very uncomfortable double penetration. Welcome to History Legends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian War. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. What is going on in the Northern Front sector? That was the situation in Kharkiv in my last video, and now this is the situation 2 weeks later. Honestly, not much has changed. The only changes are due to deep state coping about the true situation at the time. Are we surprised? Remember what I told you at the end of my last video. Mostly this is all the Russian army can achieve at this moment. Now we know they only have a couple thousands of soldiers left in reserve, meaning only a few days of combat operations. As you can see, it was indeed a recon force carried by the Russian 72nd Division. Now most of the fighting is taking place in and around Vovchansk, where the Ukrainians consolidated their defense around the aggregate factory. And to their credit, they even managed to counterattack and retake some positions. Here you can see a bird's eye view of Vovchansk from the Ukrainian perspective. We can deduce the drone recorded the town from this angle, thus directly overlooking enemy positions. Without a proper armored component to support the Russian offensive, the urban battle will be difficult for Russia's light infantry detachments. That's why the Russians brought in some specialized assault reinforcements inside the urban area, namely Wagnerian veterans. By the end of May 23rd, the Ukrainian headquarters sent urgent reinforcements towards the Kharkiv front, more specifically Vovchansk. Perhaps the Battle of Vovchansk is also a matter of ego for General Siversky. One of these groups of reinforcements consisted of 100 conscripts fresh out of the training ground and dispatched to fill in the ranks of the 125th Territorial Defense Brigade, which to be honest had been battered by the Russian offensive. Now listen to this. According to Ukrainian journalist Butusov, of these 100 replacements, only 3 were taken in by the brigade. 3! All the others were deemed unfit for duty. Can you imagine that? And that's not even the worst part. All the paperwork was filed in for 100 replacements, and a report was sent in. All of this was a lie. Добро пожаловать в Украину. Welcome to Ukraine. Anyway, by the 25th of May, Seversky sent in a new massive wave of reinforcements, namely battalions of the 31st Mechanized Brigade, 1st Special Purpose Brigade, 9th Border Guard Detachment, and units of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Here you can even see one of their Striker armored fighting vehicles counterattacking right inside Vovchansk. Thanks to these reinforcements, Ukrainian resistance inside the city stiffened. They also got resupplied, like you can see in this video, where Ukrainian soldiers are firing newly delivered Javelin missiles. All this allowed the Ukrainians to counterattack and retake some lost positions. Now the only problem is that all this doesn't make any sense from a tactical perspective. The problem for Ukraine is that the Russians destroyed 5 bridges going over the Vovchansk River. These bridges are crucial to supply and maintain this counterattack on the northern bank of the Vovchansk River. Like this bridge you can see on the map. It's the main one leading right into the heart of Vovchansk. In this footage, you can see a group of Ukrainian soldiers painfully crossing over the Vovchansk River using a makeshift passage to make up for the part that had been destroyed. This will seriously limit resupply and further rotations of Ukrainian units positioned on the northern side of Vovchansk. And the worst is that Russian mortars already zeroed in right on that bridge, like this group of Ukrainian soldiers evacuating one of their wounded comrades, when all of a sudden, they all get hit. Since they're part of the Vovchansk River that are not that wide, at least Ukrainian engineers were able to set up a couple of pontoon bridges, like this one you can see on screen, but that eventually got hit by the Russians. Well, this means it will require a lot of resources for Ukraine to maintain their small breachhead on the northern part of Vovchansk, a position that could collapse at any moment. But in the end, Ukraine is just sacrificing precious units that will just get Ctrl-Alt-deleted by Russian artillery. Like in this video of this Russian TOS-1A heavy flamethrower, bombarding entire sectors of Vovchansk. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are just drawn deeper inside the city into a huge fire bag. And what is the Ukrainian response? Now, on the western side of the Kharkiv front, the Ukrainians established some trench networks along this tree line to stop the Russians, when all of a sudden, 4 Russian FAB-500 bombs were dropped side by side on a Ukrainian bastion not even 500 meters long. Spoilers, the Russian army might even open a new front in the coming days somewhere in the sector of Voron. Why not? While the Eastern Front is crumbling, Ukraine is sending all their available reserves to the north, especially since now they know the Ukrainian border is so poorly defended. Tens of kilometers of front line held by only a few hundred territorial defense guys, sitting in half-assed fortifications sprinkled by a handful of mines. Ukraine is literally asking for enemy reserves to attack towards Kharkiv, Ukraine's second biggest city. Situation report in the area of Chasiv Yar. By our last report, Russian recon units had just reached the Seversky Donets canal. We could have expected a big crossing operation, but the Ukrainians do have a number of fortified positions to prevent such an action. We can also believe the Russian command wants to secure this entire part of the canal before launching phase 2. And this means the capture of the canal micro-district. As we've seen in the past few weeks, the Russians have launched very aggressive frontal attacks against that sector. Here you can see a column of 6 Russian IFVs attacking towards the canal micro-district. In my opinion, they pushed from Chromove, used this natural cover before going onto the main road at the last minute. The first vehicle was hit but not destroyed. Due to subsequent artillery strikes, only 3 IFVs made it onto the urban area. By the way, notice how these BMPs have also now been upgraded with nets and cages, just like the ones operating in Krasnohorivka. Who would have thought that such a turning point in armored vehicle design was made possible by the imagination of some DPR coal miners? Before going back to base, the remaining IFVs disembarked their infantry component, roughly 20 riflemen. That's when, on their way back, the last 3 remaining BMPs were also hit by artillery and drones. Pro-Ukrainian Deep State UA talks of an attack force of 20 vehicles. That means at least 3 waves of 6 vehicles like we have just witnessed. In that case, we can estimate 60 to 100 Russian soldiers made it inside the canal micro-district and started taking hold of the first buildings. Ukrainians often try to bring their own reinforcements to counterattack, but it's a dangerous mission, as you can see with all the vehicles that got hit even before reaching the micro-district. Behind me you can see a massive Russian artillery strike of more than 40 Grad rockets on one of the residential sectors of Chasiv Yar. Now if you have to geolocate it, here's the canal, here's the micro-district, and here's the first neighborhood of Chasiv Yar proper. To help you, here's a top-down perspective. This was the viewpoint of the drone. Clearly, the Russians intend to prevent any Ukrainian reinforcements to reach the micro-district, or at least make it as painful as possible, like this Ukrainian infantry column that got hit by an artillery strike, with the survivors scattering to cover. Now, with everything we know about this, I don't understand why this German journalist would write on his Twitter post that the Russians fired at still inhabited residential areas. Stop the cope, bro. This sector is located right on the front line and is only inhabited by hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers. Meanwhile, further south, on the 21st of May, the Russians finally captured Klishivka after trying for months, with a mighty turtle tank charge right into the village. And guess what? A couple days later, another armored column led by a turtle tank flanked the remaining Ukrainian defenders in Ivanivske, which, by the way, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, was supposedly already fully controlled by the Russians weeks ago.
Right.
From this moment on, we can believe the next steps for the Russians will be to clear the area between Andrivka and Klishivka, but also to storm the Ukrainian fortifications laying between Klishivka and Ivanivske. We can see in the Chasiv Yar sector that the Ukrainian command is slowly proceeding to a retrograde movement due to a lack of manpower and possibly to concentrate their forces on the west bank of the Seversky Donets canal. The Russians also slid right inside the DMs of Kalinivka to secure the last standing bridge in the sector. They also pushed 1 kilometer into this direction to inch their way forward one tree line after another. Look boys, you're never going to say no to an extra inch. However, that's when foreign volunteers of the International Legion showed up and punished that Russian spearhead. In this first person view of the battle, you can see how they proceeded to clear these buildings. but most importantly, you can even hear that these guys speak Spanish. On the 21st of May, a second Russian armored assault against the Canal micro-district was met with heavy fire. However, what's important to note is that even if the vehicles get hit, more often than not, all the infantrymen inside have time to run for cover. So in that last example, even if 6 vehicles got smashed, you now have an additional 35 troops roaming in this forest, located at a walking distance from the Canal micro-district. With that being said, by the 28th of May, it became clear that the continuous armored assaults to capture the Canal micro-district brought very limited results. But still, by late May, the ring around the Canal micro-district was tightening, and it's just a matter of time before the white-blue-red flag is raised on this position. And according to the latest news, Russian units were spotted right next to the Kalynivka bridge. Now, what was shocking to me is that Russian infantrymen calmly exited from their armored vehicle. And you know why? Since all the surrounding Ukrainian fortifications were empty. You can see it, not a single sign of battle. What a disaster. Now, as part of the less interesting spin-off of the Battle of Chasiv Yar, the Russian army tried to reactivate its troops around the Siversk Salient, a front line that has barely moved in the last 2 years. On the 8th of May, Russian assault detachments pushed 1 kilometer and finalized the capture of Vesely, which by the way has been declared as captured by the Russians at least 20 times. Then an interesting video was released on the 21st of May, where we see Ukrainian drones target a Russian infantry unit somewhere in that sector. One can wonder how they got there, right? Either they attacked through this tree line or through this one. But overall, this would mean that the Ukrainians indeed have lost control over this area. With that being said, it opens the possibility of a Russian flanking maneuver on Spearheads. Now let's take a look at the situation on the Luhansk Front. After the capture of Kislivka and Kotlyarivka in late April, the Russian forces in that sector once again turned their attention on Ivanivka. On the 24th of May, the entire village faced a violent artillery barrage. This time, the Russians benefited from the advantage of controlling the southern flank. But the next day, most of the village had fallen into Russian hands, apart from that 400-meter-long part in the north. Here, according to this video recorded by soldiers of the 241st Regiment of the 47th Tank Division, the village of Ivanivka is now fully under Russian control. During the retreat, the Ukrainians probably suffered some losses, as we can attest with this abandoned M113 APC. I get the feeling that the Ukrainians barely defended the place. They only positioned one small detachment, and the moment the Russians attacked, the Ukrainians pulled back. Since the Russians are now dropping massive loads on Stepove and Novoselivka, we can guess this will be their next objective. And bonus point, it would allow them to reach the PO7 road going towards Kupiansk. Now 2 days later, by the 26th, Russian troops captured the village of Berestove. The fall of the village was confirmed by the follow-up Ukrainian strikes on Russian deployment points. Now, instead of looking at a series of isolated coups de main, this seems to have been the start of combat actions all along the Luhansk Front. While all this was happening, further south on May 24th, some Russian troops were targeted by Ukrainian FPV drones along this tree line 3 kilometers east of Stelmachivka. 2 days later, 5 kilometers south, the Russians managed to land some infantrymen after a 1 kilometer push. In this Ukrainian drone footage, you can see that the Russians pushed with their turtle tank. No way, I can't believe the entire Russian army is now using them. Anyway, that turtle tank was covering riflemen disembarking from an IFV. However, no luck according to video evidence. Both vehicles were eventually destroyed and abandoned. And in this sector, on the 31st of May, a Russian armored unit pushed 1.5 kilometers to test Ukrainian defenses west of Novoselivsk. The Ukraine command must have been extremely nervous since the sector of Novovodyane was also brewing with an increase of combat reports. Meanwhile, near Makivka, a Russian recon unit advanced 500 meters before being shelled by enemy artillery. It seems the Russians are trying to storm this hilltop on the west bank of the Ocheretye River, which would allow them to flank the village of Makivka from the north. Now the last battlefield we'll be taking a look at is Krasnohorivka. Although some commentators announced the fall of the city, visual evidence says otherwise and we're just not there yet. Overall, the Russians faced a brick wall after capturing the factory. I actually expected the Ukrainian defense to stiffen around here, but it actually took place 500 meters to the north, so my apologies. In response, the Russians tried to expand their area of control westwards. I mean, we talked about it, it's the most logical thing to do. Meanwhile, detachments of the 5th Brigade Oplot of the DPR were also trying to turn Ukrainian positions from the western end of the city, because all the Ukrainian units positioned on the southern outskirts of Krasnohorivka are really isolated, which makes rotations and resupply much more complicated. Any Ukrainian vehicle going in that direction will be spotted kilometers ahead. Then, on the 24th of May, Russian troops raised a tiny white-blue-red flag over school number 2. In this video from the next day, we see 6 armored vehicles push in column formation across open terrain until they reach one of the main roads of Krasnohorivka. Now you would think they're penetrating deep inside enemy lines, but to my surprise, instead of pushing northwards, they pushed eastwards along this set of commie blocks. These IFVs probably disembarked an entire platoon of riflemen inside some of these buildings. Then something pretty spectacular happened on the 29th of May. So here you can see a Ukrainian BMP 300 meters away from where the Russians had been disembarked earlier. Then, we don't know why, the BMP rushed through Russian lines for 2 kilometers. First it was drones and then artillery. But eventually the BMP was destroyed and its crew captured by a Russian recon squad. From all this, we can believe the Ukrainians have heavily reinforced this northwestern quarter of Krasnohorivka. In turn, the Russians will probably try to get hold of these multi-level buildings in order to flank the city from the east. Another option would be to storm Ukrainian positions head-on, to take one building after another, a pure battle of attrition. By the way, in my previous video, I said the Ukrainians only had one bridge securing their logistics line. My mistake. With the satellite map, we can actually see they have 3 roads going into Krasnohorivka, and that the river is more like a huge swamp. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.